Excellent. All right, welcome all to our second Wisconsin DI Team Manager Training of the year. This one we entitled Think Like an Appraiser. I love this training. I've done it before. It's been a few years, but I was glad to bring it back. My name is Chrissy. I am currently one of the co-affiliate challenge masters for the engineering challenge in Wisconsin. But I've been doing DI since I was 9. So I participated all the way through high school and have been appraising and since 2004 and as a challenge master since 2005, including two-year rotations as an international challenge master for the engineering challenge. So that's kind of my background. So this training is really exciting to me because the goals of this training are really to kind of demystify some of what happens on the appraisal side and on the tournament side for all of you. So this is open to some of you maybe brand new, having never gone to a tournament before. So we're going to try to explain who's who in the roles and what things are like as you walk through tournament day. You may not be thinking about that quite yet, but as you get closer to tournament, then we encourage you to kind of go back and maybe review some of those things. And then also for those of you that are experienced, we hope that, you can pick up some good tips and tricks around how scoring works and tournament data forms and how you interact with appraisers and what they're looking for and all of that kind of information. So that's my goal for the training tonight. Thank you all for being here. We couldn't do it without you. We never have a shortage of kids that want to do destination imagination. Usually our limiting factor are our adults that are willing and able to be team managers. So thank you for making this possible for your kids and your teams. You are so important, and we are here to support you as much as we can every step of the way via these trainings, your regional directors. Speaking of which, Robin and Ann are on the call with me. We've got 2 regional directors here. You guys want to introduce yourself just to put a face to your names? Ann, you want to start?
So I'm Ann Cowling. I am the co-director of the Milwaukee region, which is basically Milwaukee County and Waukesha County.
Excellent. Thanks, Ann. And Robin?
Robin Harper, Bay Lake, which is Door, Kewaunee, Eastern Brown, and Northern Manitowoc counties.
Excellent. Thanks both for joining. They're going to help me facilitate the chat and make sure if we've got questions tonight that I'm pausing and answering those questions. And also if you are in those regions, you can put a face to the name, and they or your regional directors in your region certainly are great resources for you as well throughout the season. I'll also share my contact information at the end of this. So if you've got any questions, you can feel free to email as well. So what are our goals for tonight? We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go pretty fast, but I think it's all really important stuff. First of all, we're going to talk about breaking down a challenge. I'm going to talk to you about how I read a challenge and what I pull out is what's important, thinking like an appraiser as I'm looking through that challenge and kind of the things that I look for that hopefully will be helpful for you as you're working with your teams. Then we're going to talk through the appraiser team interaction points at the tournament. So starting with the pre-prep process, we're going to talk about that all the way through getting your scores back and the appeals process at the end. What all of those interaction points are and all of the forms and questions and things that happen throughout that process to try to demystify that experience for you and help you understand it a little bit more so that you can then take that back to your teams and help them be as prepared as possible for tournament. As part of that, we're also going to talk about some of your paperwork, how to get it right. I'm going to talk about pain points that we see as appraisers or things that, might go back if you're part of the pre-prep process, if you're missing something or something's filled out right, to help hopefully eliminate some of that back and forth for you. And so we're going to talk through that. And then we're also going to do a deep dive into scoring, including the rubrics that we train appraisers with and all of that to try to demystify that process, because it's not a secret, it's standard. And our goal in Wisconsin DI is to be consistent and transparent. So we want to share that with all of you just so that you understand what the appraisers are looking for and what some of those examples are. So challenge breakdown. I'm not using any challenges from this year, so sorry, I didn't want to pick a favorite so that some of you could get an advantage there. So I've picked Daring Escape from last year. And so we're going to talk about the challenge there, and also the score sheet examples and everything that I see are going to be for Daring Escape. So just to try to put a consistent example throughout the training tonight. So this looks a little bit different than the format of the challenges this year, but it's pretty consistent with the different sections of a challenge. So I think it'll be a good example for us to walk through. One of the first things that I look for in a challenge, certainly it's important to read your team challenge cover to cover many times, be very familiar with it. But one of the most important things on this front page that may be easy to miss is your team budget and your time limit. And so your team budget, the total value of materials that you use, that is unique to every single challenge. So when you fill out your expense report, that budget, make sure that you know what it is for your challenge. Typically, engineering and technical may be a little bit higher than maybe fine arts, but it really varies from year to year. And that's based on what you're being asked to do in the challenge, recognizing that sometimes some of the technical elements may require a little bit more budget than other challenges. And then the other important part that's on this page is your time limit. So when you're at your tournament and presenting, how much time do you have, including setup for your entire presentation? For most of the challenges, other than improv, that tends to vary a little bit more from year to year. It is typically 8 minutes, but make sure every year you're checking that, because sometimes there is a challenge that comes out that isn't 8 minutes. So you don't want to be surprised there. So that's the first thing that I look at. Then I skip to this page where the scoring is, and I look at this section on the bottom. Where are the points? Now we know that DI is a process in a journey throughout the tournament year, but this is really all about the tournament and scoring. So that's kind of the focus here of how I look. But this is helpful because how many points each of your areas are can help you and your team's time manage for how much time you're spending on certain elements and certain things throughout the presentation. So you can see, as part of the whole challenge, your central challenge is worth 60% of the score. And so that's all of those specific requirements to your challenge, or 75% for improv because they don't have team choice elements. 15% are team choice elements. So 75% is that presentation that you're going to work on ahead of time to bring to tournament and present in that 8 minutes presentation on tournament day. And then 25% of that is your instant challenge. So just, so you're going to be spending likely the majority of your time in your team meetings on your central challenge and team choice elements, because that's where the majority of your points are. And then if we look at your central challenge, it's important to kind of see what is that breakdown of all of the elements of the story or of your central challenge. So for this one, you can see it's pretty evenly divided into these 3 areas. So daring devices is about a third, hazards is just a little bit less than a third, and that story is 36%. So that just kind of gives you a guide in your challenge for what sections are worth what percentage of your overall points. And then I dive onto this page and look a little bit more into scoring. If I've got my appraiser hat on, this page is incredibly important because this tells appraisers what they are scoring. The entire challenge is going to break down the details about what all of this means and the definitions and things like that. But this is going to give you a really clear indicator when somebody on tournament day is looking at this element and putting a score down, what they're looking for. So, for instance, on this one, your daring devices, up to 20 points for the technical design of daring device number 1, which is your technical methods used. Your technical design is a result of a plan for carrying out or accomplishing a task. So I'm not going to go through all of these elements, but definitely make sure in your challenge that you're not ignoring this page or not looking at this page, because these lines underneath each of these scored elements are really deliberate and really important, and are what the appraisers are going to focus in on when they put those scores down. So then from there, I go back and I start deep diving into each of these sections. There's a few, I think there's some information about this in the roadmap. I think there was a blog post on the DI website about this. But, I always like to say a good thing is to get a highlighter out and start looking through the challenge and looking for things that you must do, that you may do, that you must not do, that should be. Because the challenge is going to be very specific around those things. And if you don't do something that you're supposed to do, your scores are going to be impacted. Or if you do something that you must not do, your scores are going to be impacted. So paying attention to those things are going to be really important. So like your daring devices, use technical methods. So you see that requirement is in that first line. And then the second line goes on to define what technical methods are. So it's important to kind of break that down and really, as you're walking through your challenge, understand that so that you know that when you solve your challenge, that you're meeting all of those requirements and that you look for that. Also, anything that must not. If it says you can't do it, you can't do it. And if you do it on the turn, as you do something that it says that you must not during your presentation, your scores are going to be impacted, either via an illegal procedure deduction or a lower score, or sometimes 0 points because you didn't meet the challenge requirements. So make sure that you are walking through and paying really close attention to these detailed requirements for what the challenge says in conjunction with that scoring page, because that's going to really, really help you hone in on those areas of things in the challenge that you have to do. As a general rule, a really good thing to keep in mind is if it doesn't say you can't, then you can. So that's kind of a DI general rule. If you go through and it doesn't say specifically that you can't do something, chances are pretty good that it's allowed. And so just keep that in mind as you're reviewing all of these things as well. Pay attention to the tables. I know the improv challenge this year has some tables. Some other challenges have tables. A lot of times these tables include choices of things that you have to pick from to include in your challenge. And so, the definitions and things that are included in these tables or any diagrams that you have in your challenge, that's important. And that's part of the challenge too. So don't just focus on the words and skip over any of the images or diagrams, because a lot of times the questions that you might have are included in those tables or included in the pictures in the challenge. Your story, is a general section. Every challenge has a story section. So things in that, again, may or must. A lot of times in the story section, you'll see things like number 4 here. Your team may include more than 1 feat of skill in the story. However, only 1 feat of skill will earn points. And so as part of your challenge requirements, it's important that you're paying attention if there is something required, that if it says 1 or singular, that when you're choosing what is scored, we really mean that that's 1 or singular. Because as appraisers, if you write that you want you have 3 in this example, feet of skills in your presentation, and the appraisers read that, they're going to come back when your team is on tournament day or when you're doing your pre-prep process and say, we can't score all of those. The challenge says only 1 can earn points. You've got to pick 1. So it's important to pay attention to things like that as you're going through your challenge, because that can help alleviate some stress while you're going through the pre-prep process, or if it's not caught there on tournament day, where you might need to make some last minute adjustments for what is or isn't being scored. Another thing that's really important to look at are things like integration, or what exactly is being evaluated for each thing. So team choice elements are really, team choice, it is just as it sounds. It can be anything that's not already being scored as a requirement in your central challenge. And so you have to pick two things, but each of those two things are going to be scored for the creativity and originality, the quality, workmanship, and effort, and for integration. How well does it fit into that presentation? So when you're coming up with your ideas and thinking about how they're going to be evaluated, it's important to think about those three areas, because you could spend a whole lot of time making something like a costume where you bought a pattern, you cut it out, you sewed it, you put it together, and it looked spectacular. So you could get a really high score for the quality, workmanship, and effort. But for creativity and originality, if I'm looking at that, I see you used fabric, which is a common thing to use for a costume. You didn't design the pattern, you bought a pre-purchased pattern from somebody else. So the creativity and originality could be low. And so it's important as you're working with your teams and thinking about the requirements that you're looking at all three of those areas. So I'm going to pause there. I know that was kind of brief and by no means an exhaustive list of how to read a challenge, but just wanted to highlight some of those things that are important. And as we get into the tournament data forms and some of the other things, we'll deep dive a little bit more into some of these areas as well. I'm going to keep going then. Something new this year that I wanted to highlight is, for those of you that have done it before, you're probably used to the concept of a regional tournament. This year, Wisconsin DI is not having regional tournaments. We are moving to a sectional tournament format. So your team will only go to one sectional. We have 4 of them. The Northeast, on Saturday, February 25th, which is Green Bay, Bay Lake, and Northeast. Whoops. Went too far. There we go. The Northwest tournament on March 4th, which is West Central and St. Croix Valley. The Southeast tournament, which is Milwaukee and South Central, on March 11th. And the East Central tournament, which is Winnebago, Kettle Moraine, and Blackhawk, on March 18th. And so one of these 4 tournaments you will go to. That's important because I'm going to talk about timelines of some of these things for pre-prep and when you need to be getting some things in. This is all on the Wisconsin DI website as well. But just know, when we say sectional tournament, that is very similar to what you would have experienced as a regional. The main difference being all teams at the sectional tournament will be competing against each other. We're not separating things out for advancement by region. So everybody that attends the East Central sectional tournament, for instance, all elementary teams in a challenge will compete against each other, and the top teams will advance. All middle level teams in a challenge, all secondary level teams in a challenge. We have not determined how many teams from each of our sectional yet will be advancing. We're waiting to see what our final team numbers come out as, but just something to keep in mind as you walk through this year, that this is a little bit different. So I guess I just covered this slide. So your teams are going to present twice at your sectional tournaments. They're going to have their team challenge portion, which we're going to talk about. And then there will be the instant challenge portion, which we're also going to talk about. If you do have conflicts when you're registering, you can request specific times. Otherwise, plan for the entire day, because your team challenge may likely be in the morning and your instant challenge in the afternoon, or vice versa. So you really should be planning that. And we are back to all in-person awards and celebration ceremonies this year. So that generally happens mid to late afternoon. So keep that in mind as well. Our affiliate tournament, Saturday, April 1st at UW Green Bay. So keep that in mind. And I do have some timelines for some of the things for pre-prep on here as well. And if you are thinking your team might advance to global finals, that is May 20th through 23rd in Kansas City. So just a few dates to keep in mind. So now we're going to dive in to the tournament itself. I know some of you are new, so I wanted to take a minute to just talk about who some of these people are on tournament day, because we are going to throw around some roles and some things. I recognize not everybody always knows who those people are. So every challenge has somebody called a challenge master. That challenge master, we have challenge masters at the regional or sectional level, at the affiliate or Wisconsin state level, and at the international level. And these folks are the experts in that challenge. They are responsible for working with the international challenge masters to ensure consistent appraising and consistent implementation of that challenge at every single tournament to provide that level playing field. They are the ones that work with the folks from the sectional tournament to find appraisers and train appraisers, and are that main point of contact for everything on tournament day. They are the ones typically that are running the sites at our tournaments. That being said, sometimes at a tournament, if there is more than one room, because we have so many teams that we have to split, we may have somebody called a head appraiser. That person operates in a very similar way to the challenge master. They're in charge of the site for that room. So they're the ones that work with the appraisers. If you've got any issues at the site, that you're going to be talking to them. They're going to make sure everything goes smoothly and be that main point of contact for that specific challenge room on tournament day. Then we've got what we call our appraisers. So these are our volunteers. All these roles are volunteer roles, by the way, who are the ones that learn the challenge and actually put down the scores on the day of. We do also have officials and non-scoring roles, but typically when we say appraiser, the appraisers are the ones that are going to read your tournament data forms, watch your presentation, talk to the kids afterwards, and actually put down those scores. We have another key role that we're going to talk about called the prep appraiser. This is the person that before your tournament is going to meet your team in the hallway or on one designated side of the gym or wherever it might be at your tournament site to check your team in and make sure everybody's there, walk through some safety things and people like that. We have another role that's really important called the timekeeper announcer. They're going to greet your team and be the ones that are the official timekeepers with the stopwatch in charge of that 8-minute presentation. So they are going to welcome your team, announce your team to the audience, let your team know when they can begin and when the 8 minutes are up. So really important role as part of the challenge team. They typically do not put down scores, but they might. Sometimes the person that is filling that timekeeper announcer role may be doubling up as an appraiser. So they may announce and also score something else as part of that presentation. So just keep that in mind that that might be the same person as an appraiser. So when we think about tournament day, these are kind of the key areas that I think about as an appraiser of the events that happen. We're starting with, and I've got slides to walk through all of the details through all of this. Pre-prep is going to happen before the tournament, which is kind of a new thing we've just started doing in the last couple years, just to help make sure we have an opportunity ahead of time to review some of the tournament data forms, make sure everything is in consistently. So that pre-prep is before the tournament, and then starting with the roller coaster check-in all the way down. Everything else is going to happen on tournament day. Engineering teams have something specific called the roller coaster check-in. This is going to happen an hour before their presentation time. So we're going to talk about some sample timelines on tournament day, but that's important if you're engineering to know that you're going to see your scheduled time. You may or may not have a check-in time on the schedule as well. And if not, that's an hour before your scheduled performance time. Then you're going to go to prep, the appraiser prep and check everything in. This is before you get into the presentation site. And then kind of the activities of reading paperwork, launch, presentation, post Q&A, and putting down scores. That all happens in that presentation room during your, just before and just after your 8-minute performance. And then roughly 15 to 30 minutes after. Now that we're doing mobile scoring, things are going much faster. We'll talk about picking up your raw scores. And then we'll also talk about instant challenge, which could happen before your presentation or after your presentation based on the schedule that is set for your tournament day. So pre-prep is going to happen ahead of tournament day. So while you're preparing and thinking about your readiness timelines for tournament, it's important that you keep these dates in mind. These are all going to be shared. I think they're likely on the Wisconsin DI website, and if not, Robin's shaking her head, yes. So they're all on the Wisconsin DI website as well. But depending on your sectional, know that the deadline for you to submit your pre-prep paperwork is going to be before that tournament day. So, you know, make sure that you're keeping that in mind. And then once you've submitted, there's a window of time you're going to need to be paying attention to your email for any questions or issues that the appraisers that are reviewing your submission might find, to make sure that they're ready for tournament. So just keep these dates in mind, and we're going to go right into what happens as part of that pre-prep process here on the next slide. A question? Oh, Robin shared a link. All right, awesome. Thanks, Robin. So what do you have to do as part of the virtual pre-prep process? So it used to be you'd write all of this stuff out, you'd have to make 5 copies and bring it all on tournament day, and then we'd frantically be trying to review all of this stuff in the prep area to make sure that you got everything right. And it was kind of stressful, it was kind of rapid. And now we've moved to a much better process all around. I can definitely say from an appraisal perspective, this is so much better to be able to take a look at this ahead of time. And I think for teams as well, it's cut down on a lot of stress because we can handle any issues ahead of time and give your team more time to actually talk about resolving them as part of that process. So as part of this, and all of this is going to happen via the resource area. You'll be submitting a tournament data form that's going to, and I'll talk through what is on all of these in the next slides. Your expense report to make sure that your challenge is meeting those budget requirements for your challenge. A team challenge prep checklist, which just walks through safety information, a checklist of all your elements to make sure you've identified everything, and a declaration of independence. And so all of that's kind of for your team challenge. And then there's also something called an instant challenge prep checklist that you'll walk through and submit as well. So your tournament data forms, also referred to as TDFs. So those of us in the appraisal world there, or those of us that have done this for a while, you might hear the term shortened to just TDF. That's really the tournament data forms. There are example tournament data forms at the end of each of your challenges. And so this is really an opportunity for your team to tell the appraisers what they're scoring, right? Because all of these are going to be unique elements to your team. And the appraisers may know there's certain categories of things, but this is where you can get specific on what exactly you want the appraisers to look for. The team should be involved in this. Absolutely, as team managers, you can help facilitate and actually do the typing and submitting. You're going to actually have to be the one that submits because it's going to be through your login on the resource area. But my point here being is that the team should be involved. I have definitely seen more than one tournament data form that has been completed independently by a team manager over the years, and the kids don't even know what's on it. And how do we know that? Because as appraisers, we've asked the kids what they have scored, and sometimes they don't know, and they couldn't tell us as appraisers. And so make sure that this is an activity that you're completing with your team, that they understand what their scored elements are, because the appraisers are going to ask about them. And they really do need to know, like they may not have to need to remember like what is team choice element 1 versus 2, but they should know what their 2 team choice elements are. And obviously, as team managers for your elementary teams, they're going to need more help but by the time you're working with secondary level teams, they should pretty much be able to do this by themselves. I was the person on my team that did all of this paperwork by the time I was in high school, and our team manager wasn't involved at all. So I can say confidently, they may not want to do it, but they are very capable of doing it. But walk through that. Tournament data forms are really a great opportunity for those teams to explain exactly what is being scored. In the pre-prep process, the goal of what's happening, because we can't see your presentation, we can't see your costumes or your props or any of your stuff. So all we have is that paperwork, but what we're going to be looking for is we're going to make sure something is listed for every element. Our goal is to give teams as many points as possible. We can't score something if you don't list something. We can't, as appraisers, just choose something. So make sure that you've got something listed for every element. If there's something missing, that's an example of something that the pre-prep appraisers and challenge masters will send back to you as part of that prep process and ask you to pick something and fill it in. We're also going to make sure something isn't being scored twice. You can't double dip, if you will. So you can't, like an example is if you have to have a costume as part of your central challenge element, you have to make a costume and that's being scored. That same costume cannot be your team choice element. It could be a specific part or piece of another element that's being scored, but the appraisers have to be able to independently evaluate those two items as distinct things. So the appraisers are going to be looking at that. And if there are any questions where we think it might be the same thing, we're going to flag that. Now, keep in mind, like I said, we can't see your stuff, right? So there's a chance that something might be double scored that we don't catch here, and there'll be another opportunity in the prep area on the tournament day to catch that. But we're going to do the best that we can so that if you have to make any changes, that you have time to work with your teams to do that. Another thing, like we kind of talked about when I said one singular, when we were talking about reading the challenge, to make sure for your central challenge elements, only one thing is listed as being scored. So if you have to choose a character or a costume and it specifically says only one can be considered for score, you got to pick one. And so make sure that you specific on your tournament data forms. For team choice elements, you can have more than one thing listed as a team choice element. It's team driven. So if you want all of the costumes listed, we can score all of the costumes as a team choice element. Keep in mind, if you're making that decision though, that's not always the best choice to have everything scored. Sometimes being specific is better. If you have 5 costumes and you've spent a ton of time on one costume and the other 4 are things you thrifted or didn't make or threw together, if you list on your tournament data forms, we want all of the costumes scored, the appraisers are going to score all of the costumes. And even though one costume may be spectacular, the 4 mediocre costumes are going to bring that overall score down. Whereas if you had just listed that one costume that you spent all your time on, you're going to get a better score for just that one costume. So think about this. And this is why we say this paperwork and your tournament data forms are really important because they can help you maximize scores. And the appraisers really do look and score exactly what you tell us to score on these tournament data forms. So this is an example. You don't have a lot of room. These are interactive forms. You're going to be able to type them. So you're going to list, so like for your team choice element, list what that team choice element is, and then a brief description about that. And this brief description really should be, what do you want the appraisers to consider as part of their score? Keep it brief. I know as a team member, the appraisers probably hated me. I was very verbose. I wrote a ton. I was proud of my paperwork, but on the opposite side, I would be like, no, why did you write so much? So be specific, but also recognize the appraisers don't have a lot of time to be reading these. This is another example of a description of what you want scored. So like for this one, the first box says, briefly describe your daring device 1. What are the technical methods it used? And how are the technical methods used to overcome each hazard? Something very common that we see on our tournament data forms is they literally just write what their daring device 1 is and forget about everything else. So that doesn't help the appraisers. It helps the appraisers know what the item is that they need to score, but it doesn't necessarily tell them anything about that. The appraisers are going to also talk to the kids after the presentation and get some more details around some of this stuff, but it's certainly helpful if you can make sure that you're answering all of the questions that you're being asked to answer as part of filling out these tournament data forms and being as specific as you can. The story. It's really helpful sometimes to have a good plot summary of your story. Particularly for some of our newbie and younger teams, sometimes it's really hard for the appraisers to follow what's going on. And so I'm going to just speak it like it is. That's a challenge sometimes. So if you can give us a good summary that's brief so that we know what we're supposed to be watching, that's often very helpful. And just to kind of keep that brief. So really important, we do read all of these, and if anything is confusing or not filled out, the pre-prep person may come back to that, but a lot of times the information here, the appraisers might not have questions until tournament day when the people that are actually scoring something read these and then they want to clarify what they're scoring. So some TUDF tips. I kind of talked about a lot of this. Things like spelling correctly are always helpful. Be specific, keep it brief. And at the end of the day, remember, some points are better than no points. It is always better to get something that is not a 0. The only time we give a 0 is if something isn't there or something doesn't meet the tournament or the challenge requirements. So usually there is something that you can find as a second team choice element or as another element in your challenge solution. So even if it's not the best thing, some points are better than no points. Questions on tournament data forms. This comes with practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it, like anything else. They're not scored. It's really just informational. So keep that in mind too. All right. Expense report. Another one of the favorite areas. We're going to talk about some of the pain points here that we see to hopefully help you be successful. So your expense report is the total value of all materials that your team is going to use in your presentation. And it cannot go over the budget that is in your challenge. And if it does, you're going to be asked to get rid of some stuff, or you may receive a deduction. And that's really because our goal in Destination Imagination is to provide a level playing field for all teams. So the idea of the expense report isn't necessarily what your team spent to create your solution, but if another team was going to duplicate your solution, could they do it for the provided budget? And so it's really that value. This is something that is a great learning opportunity for your kids, right? Because kids by nature have no idea what stuff costs. They don't know what the value of anything is. And so definitely make sure that you're having a conversation about this and taking some time to walk through this with your teams. You only need to list the supplies, equipments, props, and sceneries that are part of your team's presentation that you bring to the tournament site. So if you make prototypes throughout the season that don't work or that you decide not to include in your final presentation, we don't care. That doesn't have to be part of your team's budget. A good rule of thumb is when you're doing a dress rehearsal with all of your stuff, leave it out after you're done and go through your expense report and make sure every single item that is on that presentation stage is accounted for somewhere in your expense report. We, as part of the pre-prep process, are going to look to make sure that there's nothing that is glaringly wrong with your expense report, like being over budget, but this really isn't something that we can tell until tournament day, right? Because we can't see your stuff. But as part of that prep process, we're going to go through this. It also doesn't include the cost of any equipment or tools used to create your solution. So like, you know, if you're using saws or hammers and nails and things like that, that is not part of your budget. It also does not need to include portions of materials that were left over or not used. So if you buy paint to paint your backdrop, the entirety of that cost of paint does not have to be included on your expense report, only the amount used. So you can take the total cost of what your container of paint would be, and if you used 1/8 of it, divide that cost by 8, and that's what goes on your expense report. Page 23 of the rules of the road, please make sure that you take some time to read through that. It's really important. It's going to walk through all of the details of what items are included on the rules of the road. It's going to talk about how to value your solution. It's going to talk about garage sale or yard sale prices for things. If you don't buy it new, that's great. You know, we like kids to be resourceful, but it needs to have some sort of a value. So if they're finding things around the house or in somebody's garage, think about what it might cost at Goodwill or a yard sale or a garage sale. And that's the value that we expect to put on it. If you buy things that are new, we love it if you attach receipts, certainly not required, but there is an opportunity for you to do that. Sometimes teams think that's really helpful. You know, if you purchase things new or even used, if you want to include those receipts, we'll take a look at that. One thing that you need to make sure that you do attach is 1-day rentals. So sometimes you don't need certain things like, I don't even know, certain costumes, air compressors, ladders, I don't know, things that you could rent for a single day. You don't have, that are really expensive items. As long as you're not modifying those things to use in your presentation and you're just using them as is, you can have a 1-day rental of those things. But if you do, your team must submit a quote or receipt from a rental company, even if you didn't actually rent it, you just found it, as proof of the stated 1-day rental price. So just keep that in mind. This is a gotcha for a lot of teams. And then oftentimes if they don't have it on tournament day or beforehand, they don't have it, then
There's a gas station. Okay. She's Kevin.
I think somebody's talking. Okay, thanks. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't a question. So just keep that. And it should be listed on your expense report with that 1-day rental price, but you'll have an opportunity to upload that in the receipts area. That's where that quote should go. Everything should be listed, even if it's exempt. The rules of the road lists things that are exempt, like musical instruments, computers, projectors. There's things like that that we recognize are expensive, but are also very common things that most teams could find. So you don't have to put the actual cost of those things on there. However, they should be listed as exempt on the expense report or as a $0. I should clarify that because when you're filling out the interactive tournament data forms, you can't write exempt. So put a $0 next to it. And in the description, you can put exempt. That's totally fine. And then only true trash supplies should be listed as trash. Your cardboard, your newspaper, bottles, pop tabs, things like that are true trash supplies, and we recognize that. But everything else should be listed as some sort of a value. We have a question. All right. Scott's got a question that I'm gonna read. Disassembled a train table recently to have extra wood, including plastic wheels attached to the drawers underneath. Yep, it would have been in a landfill, but those parts still have value. And so even though you didn't pay anything for it, if it wasn't for DI, it can be thrift store. Now you can keep in mind, right, thrift store prices of something that's like new thrift store price and something that's not as high quality thrift store price, but that still in that example, even if you had it, still needs to have some sort of a value and can't truly be trash. Because another team might not be so lucky to have found that to disassemble and found it and not have to pay for it. And so the idea is the value if somebody else was going to have to replicate the solution. But it doesn't have to be a super high value, you know, fair, reasonable yard sale, garage sale, Goodwill prices are perfectly acceptable. All right. Comment, Robin, you have a question? Go ahead.
I just wanted to add along that line, we've heard it a lot, and you may be covering it, but someone gave it to us for free. It falls under the same exact thing that Scott is describing. You still have to assign a value to it. Even though you didn't pay anything. I see that a lot, but somebody gave it to us. Well, somebody donated it to us. We didn't pay for it. So.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Robin. It's the value, not what you paid for it, that should be included. So common issues that we see on expense report. I mean, I've kind of talked through a lot of these. Not everything is included. Make sure, like I said, you're going through and you're listing that. You're listing your exempt items as $0. Otherwise, what's going to happen is on tournament day, when we get to prep and the prep appraisers reviewing your expense report and looking at your stuff, if things are missing, you're going to have to edit and add it right then and there. And so that's just a stressful situation for everybody that we want to try to avoid. Listing the full value of an entire item rather than just the amount used. We see this a lot, particularly with new teams, where they'll have $15 for paint and they literally painted one cardboard piece on their backdrop. You know, that's taken up a lot of their budget. Is there any deduction or penalty for that? No, there's not. But just something to keep in mind, because especially if you might need that money for something else. Listing items used in practice or testing, not used in the final presentation. Again, no, you know, deductions or anything issues with that as long as you're under budget. But again, you know, it might be just taking up space that you might have, that you might need for something else. This is what Robin said, calling things trash, used, devaluing them, or things that were given to you not having value. I think that's probably the most common issue that we see. And if that happens, we're going to use it as a teachable moment and make the kids address it as part of their presentation, as part of their cost. 9 times out of 10, there's budget room for this. It's just a conversation that needs to happen and we address it. But sometimes if you're pushing the envelope on your solutions and you're near the top of your budget, this could be a very stressful situation. Listing and we will call people out on it. I definitely have had conversations with teams where we have sat and counted boards and counted what has been included in their presentation and done back of napkin calculations and said, no way could you do this for the budget amount that we think this is. And have given teams the opportunity to say, your choice is either to not present with all of these things, or if you choose to present with all of these things, you can expect an illegal procedure deduction because the fact that you're over budget is not fair to other teams. I've done that at every level from the regional level to the global finals level. So, you know, we do care and we do look at this, you know, when in doubt, we give the kids the benefit of the doubt, right? On this stuff, we're creative budgeting. We get that sometimes that happens. But if something is really egregious and clearly looks like there is no way, and those of you that have been around a while, if you know, you know, sometimes you just see that, then we do address it. But so just take time ahead of time to walk through this stuff because it's really stressful to do this on tournament day for the kids. And if you can address it ahead of time so that there are no problems, it's just going to make everybody's life easier. All right, we got some other questions. All right, for wood building materials just laying around, is Menards Home Depot price what's used? So yes and no. If it's brand new, then yes, that's a good a good rule of thumb. If you have wood or building materials lying around, that you price that based on, Home Depot, Menards, wherever. If it's something, that already had nails in it or you were using, then you can assess a used value. Think more of like your, I don't even know, some of those secondhand home restoration places. There's some places you can get materials secondhand. That might be a good way to take a look at that. So that's definitely it. So I would say just use a good rule of thumb with it. We aren't going to be pricing everything on the fly and looking at the day of cost of everything. We just want it to be reasonable and kind of that fair level playing field. All right, another question. You mentioned you have assigned a value to something even if you paid less for it. Does this apply to thrift stores, etc.? So if you bought something at a thrift store and you have a receipt for it, absolutely include it. If you got a really good deal, sometimes that is the case. And I would just say, if you can have the proof for that, definitely bring that, attach it. If you've got the receipts, we're not going to fight you on it. But yeah, Anne said, ask yourself, what would I pay for it? I have my favorite example of this, and she hasn't been an international challenge master for a lot of years, but it was probably 2009 at Global Finals. One of the ICMs for engineering, there was a team that had a halogen lamp, and they had 50 cents on their cost report, on their expense report for it. And there is a pretty heated conversation going with the head appraiser and this team manager over the fact that, nope, this halogen lamp is 50 cents, and we know that this is what that cost is. So the international challenge master comes over because she sees that something is happening. I was one of the appraisers on the site. And she figures out what's going on. And without missing a beat, her name was Judy, she reaches into her pocket. She finds 50 cents. She hands it to the team manager. She picks up the lamp. She walks off with it. And the team is like, oh, no, that's not worth 50 cents. That's worth way more than that. And she walked back and she said, you see my point? Right? This is worth more than 50 cents. So, just use common sense and a rule of thumb, but, everything should have a value, and, we try to be reasonable about it. But that's one of my favorite stories. That was really fun, and it really provided a valuable lesson for that team. Expense reports. Okay. So like I said, we're going to review this as part of the pre-prep process, but we're really going to just be looking at, are exempt items listed as $0, or do they have dollars listed? Are you over budget? If it says you have a $150 budget, does your total come out to $150 or less? Things like that. Otherwise, most of this stuff is going to be handled on tournament day, because that's when we see your stuff, right? That's when we're going to see your presentation and everything and take a look at it. We try to address expense issues before your team performs as much as possible, to give your team an opportunity to make an adjustment before we assess a deduction. That being said, sometimes for whatever reason, if something isn't caught and it's caught after the presentation, then, there may be a deduction and there'll be a conversation involved. But we do our best to try to catch this before your team goes on. Other things that you need to submit as part of your pre-prep process. We've got something called a team challenge prep checklist. A lot of this is just your team manager and your team reviewing and reflecting and just stating that, yep, we've reviewed this, we're good to go. Part of that is a safety checklist. So the rules of the road starting on page 26 has a lot of details around safety at tournaments. Safety is always our number one concern. If we find that a solution is not safe, the appraisers will always step in and stop something unsafe from happening. But, you know, things that we're checking for, this is, I guess, on tournament day, but like your team has to have shoes. If you're using any chemicals, we expect you to have forms. Whoops. I hit the wrong button. An SDS sheet for that. A few things to keep in mind. I don't know the specifics of all of the sectionals, but I can tell you that dry ice and helium will not be allowed at the affiliate tournament. Sometimes those are sectionally specific. So things like dry ice and helium, if you read the rules of the road, it says that it's site specific about whether or not it's allowed. But I mentioned that about the affiliate tournament because if it's not allowed there, it's generally a good idea to not plan for something that has helium or dry ice at your sectionals if you think you're going to advance to the affiliate, because you're going to have to change your solution before the affiliate tournament because they won't be allowed there. And that's really just site specifics, rules about what we can and cannot use. But if you do have questions about that site specific information, you can reach out to the regional directors. So this is really just yourself proclaiming essentially that you understand the safety guidelines and that your solution is safe. And as a team manager, we're looking for you to make sure that what your kids are presenting at the presentation site is safe. There's also a challenge requirement checklist as part of this. It lists just all of those items that are required elements in your challenge. We, as part of the pre-prep process, can't see your solution. So there's not really much we're looking at here. That'll be reviewed again in the prep area on tournament day. And then there's also a Declaration of Independence. All right, I see a few things in the chat. Okay, so Anne clarified that dry ice and helium are not allowed at any Wisconsin tournaments. All right, awesome. Thanks, Anne. All right. So a note about the Declaration of Independence. This used to be a separate document. Now it's part of this checklist. All of your team members, even those that cannot make it to the tournament, have to be listed on your Declaration of Independence. This is really important. Sometimes teams just list somebody worked on the solution but isn't coming to the tournament. They think that they don't need to be part of that. You have up to 7 team members that can participate as part of your challenge solution. Even if somebody drops, if you have started developing ideas or building anything as part of your challenge, they are part of your team, even if they don't make it to tournament. So those team members should be listed on that Declaration of Independence. You can, if you have 5 team members, 1 drops, you can add 2 more up until the time you register for the tournament. But that person that was part of the team is still part of your team member list. So I just like to highlight that because sometimes people don't understand that fully, and that you should list everybody on there. And we take these lists forward to other tournaments as well a lot of times and just do some, so because we want your roster to be your roster. We also there's an opportunity as part of this, basically what the Declaration of Independence is, as appraisers and as officials, there is no interference in DI. And this Declaration of Independence is a declaration from the team saying, we promise that everything that we did, all of the ideas and everything that we did are our own ideas, and we didn't have any outside help. And so as appraisers, because your team fills out this Declaration of Independence, we assume that's the case. And the only reason that we take deductions for interference are if we see something ourselves on tournament day, or if the kids tell us they had help with something. And let me tell you, kids don't lie. A lot sometimes can come out in the Q&A afterwards that we promise we're not fishing for. But if something is said, then we address it. But just know that this is important. And then as part of the instant challenge checklist, you're certifying that you don't know anything about the instant challenge ahead of time and that you're promising not to talk about anything. So very similar kind of thing for the Declaration of Independence, and making sure you're listing all your team members on that as well. All right, so that's kind of the pre-prep process, but a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about in the next steps, these tournament data forms and expense reports, are all a big part of tournament day as well. So this is kind of a sample timeline for a tournament day. So this assumes that you have a 9 a.m. performance time. Now, if you are engineering, you need to be on site and ready to go at 8 a.m. an hour before for roller coaster check-in. So keep that in mind. Everybody else, your day kind of starts where you have to actually, well, not starts, but where you need to officially be somewhere is 20 minutes before your presentation time. So for engineering, you do your 8 a.m. roller coaster check-in. That typically lasts 5 to 15 minutes. We'll talk about that process a little bit more. For everybody else, 8:40, you'll show up at the prep area with all of your stuff. That typically lasts about 15 minutes. And then about 5 minutes before your performance time, you're going to move to the launch area and kind of walk through that. And we'll talk about what happens at the launch area in a minute. Your presentation time is at 9. This is an example for 8 minutes. Not all challenges are 8 minutes, but if you had it from 9 o'clock to 9:08 is when you would be doing your presentation. We do our best to stay on time. Sometimes we run behind. I would be lying if I said we weren't. We don't sometimes run behind, but we really do try. We will never start a presentation before the time because we recognize that folks might be trying to get to that presentation time. But, you know, it may be a few minutes after 9. But if we are running behind, we make sure that every team gets the same courtesy and the same amount of time with appraisers, and then everything else just runs a little bit later. So just know that we work really hard to maintain that level playing field and consistency for every team. So we aren't going to rush your team through. We're still going to take the time that we need to have that Q&A, work with them and talk to them afterwards, even if we are running behind. After your presentation, roughly 5 minutes, the appraisers are going to meet with your team and ask them some questions. And then at 9:13, you're finished. You're going to get your stuff and you're going to exit. Roughly 30 minutes, it might be less. Your scores will be ready for pickup. We have moved completely to virtual scoring now, which is fantastic because that means that things don't have to go via paper to a central score room, get entered, and then come back to the site. So as soon as all of those scores are in and submitted, your challenge master or head appraiser, assuming they get a chance to review everything and there's no issues, your scores will be ready for pickup. You should definitely talk to your head appraiser and challenge master on tournament day to let you know exact timing or how they're kind of running for timing for when your scores will be ready. But that's kind of a good rule of thumb. You certainly, if you've got a close instant challenge, can go to instant challenge and go do that kind of stuff and then come back later. But we really do encourage you to come and pick up your scores as close to when you performed as possible. That just makes it easier throughout the day for everybody. And if there are any issues or there's appeals, then I'll talk about that here at the end. It gives us time to actually address that when it's fresh in everybody's mind and we're not stressed out that it's really close to the celebration ceremony. And then Anne and Robin aren't yelling at me because I'm still holding scores and haven't submitted them and they've got people waiting in a gym. Not that I've ever been that person. I definitely have been. But we like to just please, my request to you is to come and get your scores as soon as you're able to on tournament day. Roller coaster check-in. This is for engineering only. This is a very specific activity that happens because we have to measure and look at all of the roller coaster parts and the launching mechanism, which is going to take some time. And so 1 or 2 team members are going to bring all your parts of your roller coaster and your samples of materials. All of your details on this are in your challenge. So make sure you work through that. But that's the goal of this. This is above and beyond all of the things that we do during the prep process. And so we need this extra time to go through and make sure that everything is in compliant and that we've measured everything during that check-in process. And that way too, if there are any issues, we give time allowing teams an opportunity to bring things into compliance or make any adjustments that we can. We're pretty firm that it's an hour ahead of time, that we don't let teams check in beforehand, because it's that same level playing field, right? We don't want any one team to have an advantage because they had more time, right? We don't want somebody that's performing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to check in at 8, know that they have a problem, and then have all day to fix it. That's not fair. So that's why we maintain that hour ahead of time. You may or may not be assigned a specific check-in time on schedule. Some tournaments do specifically like print a time for check-in, but if they don't print a time, it's 1 hour ahead of time. Prep, everybody's going to come to prep 20 minutes before your presentation time. When you come to prep, you need to be ready to go. You should have all your team members, all your props, your costumes on, your makeup on, everything that you need should be ready to go when you get to the prep area. This might be in a hallway. Oftentimes it is just outside our presentation rooms. It could be on the side of a gym if you're performing in a gym. You'll know where your prep area is when your sectional tournament sends information out about what site you're in and where that is. And there'll be plenty of signage and information about where your prep area is. Everything should be assembled when you come to prep, or as much as possible. That being said, a reminder that all of your props should fit through a standard size doorway. You may or may not have double doors. You may have single doors. You may or may not have much time once you get inside through that doorway to put your stuff together. So don't make this a stressful gotcha information plan like situation at your tournament. I have seen teams that know that the engineering challenge or the technical challenge is always in the gym and this is where we are. Well, guess what? Last year at our state tournament for Wisconsin DI, we were in classrooms for engineering through tiny doorways with small spaces. So when we say, you know, look at those minimum challenge requirements for the minimal performance areas, look at the standard size of doorways and the rules of the road, and have a plan that if you don't have extra space or you don't have a double door, that you have the ability to get from prep in the hallway, get your stuff through that door, and within less than 5 minutes, be ready to go. So that's just something that I really, really encourage you as team managers to practice with your teams, the what if scenarios. I say this as a team who literally took a saw to my backdrop one year at a tournament, because we went through not only through a door, it went through a door and up the stairs to get from prep to our performance site. And we couldn't get it around through the doorway or up the stairs. And so that was a very stressful situation, but had we had some what if scenarios and some practice ahead of time, it would have been a lot easier for all of us and it would have been less stressful. Anne, you got a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that that the rules of the road, it does point out, you know, be prepared for a standard size doorway, but also be aware that that may not exist at your facility. And I did have a team manager ask me one time, you know, sort of imply that was a guarantee that we would have certain size doorways. And what I explained to her was that DI is designed so that you can do it basically anywhere. You can do it. I mean, DI happens on 6 continents. And so it's supposed to be in a variety of facilities. It's not as if I can wave a magic wand and set up a school to be perfect for a DI tournament. We have the facilities we have, but it is really important as a team manager to be prepared for and to prepare your kids for a variety of circumstances, because you just kind of don't know. And as tournament directors, we do our best, but we have limitations of the facilities that we have.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anne. We really do. We bend over backwards to give the kids the best facilities and not be stressful, but sometimes we have what we have. And it's the same for everybody, and we just want people to be prepared. So just keep that in mind. So at the tournament site, you've already submitted your forms, but the prep appraiser is going to go through everything again. If you do have changes to things, sometimes that happens, right? Some last minute changes. We recognize that, you know, our DI teams are sometimes working till the last minute. That's okay. We do have the ability to unsubmit, have you resubmit and submit things again, or make edits in the prep area. Try to limit those. But you know, make sure that you're raising any last minute changes that you have for things, because what you submitted via the pre-prep process, unless you tell us otherwise, are going to the appraisers. That's what they have access to. And so if you know, sometimes it's a good idea to have a device if you think there might be any major edits, that you can make some edits yourself in the resource area and resubmit. Otherwise, our prep appraisers should have some sort of a device where they can make edits themselves, very minor edits they can just do on your behalf. And so that's just helpful for the appraisers, right? So then when they're reading the tournament data forms and all the information, they have the most up-to-date information. Also, as part of the prep process, we didn't talk about this, but highlight any team clarifications that you have submitted. I am not going to go into a lot of details about team clarifications. I talked about this a lot in my new team manager training, and there's information in both the roadmap and the rules of the road on this. But if you do have questions about your specific challenge requirements, you do have the opportunity to email and ask the International Challenge Masters for clarification. If you do that, definitely make sure you're highlighting that at your sectional tournaments or affiliate or any levels. You know, the challenge masters will have access to that, but it's always just a good reminder that you know, let folks know that you do have team clarifications and what they are. Never bad to have that copy with you, just so that everybody knows what you asked and what the International Challenge Master said. The prep appraiser is going to make sure all your team members are present, that you don't have more team members than you said that you had. I've had that. I one year had a team show up with 8. That was a new experience for me. That is not allowed. Actually, you can be disqualified if that happens. So don't do that. But we do double check to make sure everybody's there, that you've got everything submitted, that anything looks out of the norm. This is where they're going to take another look at all your required elements and say, hey, can you show me what's team choice element 1? What's team choice element 2? What's this part in your central challenge? And that's the point sometimes where if the kids holds up the same thing for 2 things that we ask, that we realize something might be double scored. And so if that's the case, they'll generally come and get the challenge master or flag it for the appraisers to talk to your kids to make sure that, you know, we don't have any double scored elements, and just as that double check again. The prep appraiser is also going to be looking at that expense report. You're going to have all your stuff with you in the prep area. So they're going to be looking at your expense report and what you have in front, just to make sure that it's filled out and under budget, and that, you know, there's nothing that looks amiss or just doesn't look right. They're going to ask about flash photography, if you can have, you know, flash or take pictures or videos. That's information that you will be asked. So ask your kids about that. If it's okay if people take pictures of them, if it's okay if people take pictures with flash, if it's okay if people record them. Sometimes teams don't know that they're going to be asked that, and it just kind of throws them a little bit as part of the prep process. It's okay to say no if they would prefer it. But you know, most teams do allow it. I know a lot of times people say no flash, but you can take pictures or videos, fine, but it's really up to the team. And they're going to walk through just kind of those safety guidelines outlined in the rules of the road. One of the things that's really important is make sure everybody has shoes. So no socks, no like footies or things like that. We want an actual sole on a shoe. And that's really for safety. and the kids need to keep those shoes on for the entire time. We just don't want anybody stepping on anything. So that's something just to make sure you're double checking, because we've definitely experienced stressful situations where a kid doesn't have shoes on and they got to go find shoes suddenly in the prep area, and that just is added stress that is not necessary. Improv, also as part of the improv project, you're going to be randomly selecting your competitions, one of the competitions and one of the experts that are listed on your tournament data forms. I'm not going through all the details, the requirements of this. If you're in the improv challenge, this will make sense to you. But as part of your prep process, they're going to walk you through that, and you'll be randomly selecting a piece of paper that lists the compilation, and all of these will be selected during the presentation, and then based on what the challenge requirements are, you'll know it at the designated time as listed in the challenge. But just know that for improv, the prep process is a little bit different than the other challenges. But they also don't have stuff or expense reports, so there's that trade-off. So after the prep appraiser is done, they're going to submit your forms as ready to the appraisers so that they electronically can see this. All of our scoring now is done mobile scoring, and so either on their phones or iPads or laptops, the appraisers are going to have a copy each of your tournament data forms and expense reports, and they're going to be able to take a look at all of that. So once they're ready and the team ahead has finished their presentation, sometimes during the Q&A that's happening with the appraisers, after they're done performing that, often when you're going to be asked to come in via the launch area. So you'll move your props in. Your team managers, you can absolutely help move those props to the launch line, but it's up to the team to move. A note about prep as well. As team managers, please let your teams answer all of the questions that the appraisers have. You as a team manager have done your job up until this point, and you can absolutely be there with your kids and, observe, help move things, but you should not be involved in that process, as the appraisers are asking. Let the kids answer. And if you think it's a problem, put a piece of duct tape over your mouth, do what you got to do. But you don't want to give the impression to the appraisers that you are interfering. You may have not done a single thing to interfere all tournament season long, but if you are really hands-on or really chatty or not letting your kids answer any of the questions on tournament day, as an appraiser and as an official, that makes me have a red flag go up and say, have they really been good and not interfering, or are they interfering? And that makes me watch you closely. I'm going to just be honest about that, right? Like the more you're overstepping and hands-on with your teams on tournament day, the more we think there might be interference going on. If we don't prove it, we're not going to see anything, but if we do see it, we're going to call you on it. Usually it's a teachable moment kind of a thing, and a warning to start. But if it continues, you could cause your team interference deduction. Robin, you have something to add?
As the prep appraiser, usually in my own challenge, I kick the team manager out. I send them down the hall or across the hall. They're still within sight. But I actually ask them to move away. So if you are in a tournament, the prep appraiser may ask you to step aside.
Yeah,
Because
you absolutely should and can be in line of sight with your kids. Like, we're not going to ask you to not do that, but we do want you to give them some space to answer those questions and kind of work through that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not, like get out of here, but just encourage so the kids know that I have their complete attention. On the flip side, I have had one year the improv problem had an expense report and a team showed up without it, and the team manager started to fill it out. So I had to ask her to excuse herself. So That's just a,
Yeah, I mean, we're not gonna be mean about it. We'll
oh
give
no,
you
I
some
I'm
reminders,
certainly
but
not
yeah,
saying that
yeah. No, and I don't think you are, Robin, but like, just keep in mind that, as team managers, we want you to observe. We don't want you to participate when we're talking to the kids, because it's their solution and they should be the ones that are asking that. In the launch area, once you get in, a lot of times this is the time where you go sit down. There will be designated seating for you in the presentation area. So the teams will come in with all of their stuff. There's going to be a launch area and they're going to be asked to wait behind that launch area. The timekeeper announcer is going to come and talk to their kids and welcome them, introduce themselves, orient the presentation site. So if you have a power, if they need to plug something in, they'll show them where the electrical cord is. The appraisers may have some questions for the teams, but team managers really encourage you to just go sit down and let the kids handle it from this point on. It's less tempting for you than if you're hovering, and they just, they got it. The appraisers at this point be reading the paperwork. So while the timekeeper announcer is talking to your kids, that's what's going to happen during this time. They want to make sure that they're understanding what they're looking for when it comes to scored elements. They're going to double check that anything isn't double scored that wasn't caught in prep. And they're going to focus specifically on anything that is performance related or takes place during the presentation, i.e. something that they can't go back and look at afterwards. There's going to be time after the presentation to look at any technical devices or any backdrops or costumes or things like that. But particularly if an event needs to happen or a transformation or a song or a dance or something like that, that they need to make sure they don't miss. That's what they're going to be focusing on the most while they're reviewing these tournament data forms. They may ask for clarification if they're confused about something. So if you list, hey, Johnny's song and dance, they might come over and say, hey, can Johnny raise their hand? And Johnny raises their hand, and then they know who they're looking for and what they're looking at. They also, if something is double scored, they may come over and ask the kids for clarification. Don't freak out as a team manager. We do this because we want to give the team as many points as possible. After it's done, it's too late. But if they need to pick something else to be scored, then this is the time to do that, and you want us to do that because it gets your team more points. Or they might just be generally confused as to what they're looking at. Sometimes the tournament data forms are a little rough and we just don't understand what we're supposed to be looking at or understand what you mean about a certain item. And so sometimes it's just easier to go and ask the kids, like, what is scored here and what do they mean? And then the appraisers can make some notes and know what's being scored. So don't be alarmed if the appraisers come over. It doesn't necessarily mean there's something really bad happening. It just means that the appraisers want to make sure that they know what they're scoring. Paperwork pain points, not enough description, or too much information. Like I said, if you're really verbose and write a book, it's really hard for the appraisers to get to the meat of what they're trying to score. So be specific and be descriptive, and write enough that they know what they're scoring, but not so much that they just don't have time to read it. So during the presentation, a few things to keep in mind. Not every appraiser is going to be necessarily scoring everything. Generally, that's not the case. It's really rare that every appraiser is scoring everything. So each appraiser everything will be scored by at least 2 appraisers so that we have an average. Whenever possible, we have more than 2 people looking at every item. But know that those folks are going to be moving around the presentation site and looking at certain things. So particularly like in the engineering and technical challenges, there's going to be folks that are what we call heads down appraisers that are not going to pay any attention at all to your presentation and what's going on, because they're going to be focused on the roller coaster or the puzzle or those specific pieces. So don't be alarmed if they're not watching the kids' performance. That's not their job. They know what they're focused on and they know what they're scoring, and they're going to move and look and be where they need to for that. Then there's going to be a set of appraisers that are going to be the ones that are looking for the overall presentation and the story. They may move around. It is rare. I mean, if you're in an auditorium setting, the appraisers may, just for the nature of the setup, have to sit and be seated in front of the stage and then in the presentation site. But like in a gym, when I set up a site, I intentionally put the table off to the side and make my appraisers get up and move and not sit behind a table. And so as a general rule, the kids should plan to present to the audience, and the appraisers will move so that they can see and hear what they need to during the presentation. Also keep in mind that we're using mobile scoring. So if you see the appraisers on their phones or on a tablet during the presentation, I promise you they are paying attention. That is where the tournament data forms are and where they're entering notes and scores. So I just like to call that out because, you know, if you see somebody on their phone and it looks like they're not paying attention, I promise you that they are, and they're not, you know, on Twitter or on TikTok or something. They're paying attention to your kids. Some pain points for the presentation. One of the biggest things is unable to hear the kids. This is the hardest thing that we have, particularly the little ones. They can be the loudest they ever want to be, but for some reason when they, you know, in your team meetings and in practice or at recess, they're going to be really loud. But when it comes time to perform, they're going to be real quiet. And so that's something that you, as a team manager, a good tip there is to record your kids performing from a distance back and see how hard it is for them to hear. You know, just kind of some general reminders. You can use instant challenge as part of that as a teachable moment and training tool to make sure that they're speaking loudly when they hear. Remind the kids that grandma in the back row of the bleachers needs to hear, and, you know, to make sure that they're presenting to that. Because if the appraisers can't hear what's going on, the scores are going to reflect that, right? Because they're going to do their best to move in here, but if they just can't follow and know, they're going to have lower scores. I'm completely confused as to what is going on. No clear storyline or action. I have appraised many of teams where, I'm going to be really honest, I have no idea what I'm watching. And we do the best we can, and you ask questions afterwards, but just keep that in mind, that if the appraisers have no idea what's going on, you're going to have low scores. So just, again, a good tip is to record their presentation, remind them that the appraisers only get to see something once, and to make sure that it's really clear that if they're just watching it once without any additional explanation, then make sure that that happens. Multiple elements happening all at once that need to be scored. The exception of this is like the technical or the engineering elements. We understand that things are happening, but you know, if you have both team choice elements happening simultaneously, make sure that it is very likely that the appraisers are going to be scoring both of them. And so make sure that they are able to know what's happening and can look at what's being scored. Team not emphasizing when something happens or something that's really easy to miss. Sometimes teams have a song or a dance that lasts for 5 seconds, and that's it. It is really easy as an appraiser to miss that. And so it is in your best interest to make sure that it is very apparent when you are performing something, particularly if it is you see it once and it's done kind of a thing, that the appraisers know when it's happening so that they don't miss it. So just, you know, keep that in mind. Integration scores, I'm not going to talk about a lot about this right now. I have a rubric I'm going to share, but that's something that's definitely a pain point. Teams traditionally don't do very well at integration. The team member, this was one of the hardest things that I had to do. And so if your integration scores are low, don't be surprised, because most teams' integration scores and how well everything fits together are really low. But We're going to give you some rubrics, which will hopefully help you work with your kids and the kids understand what they're being scored on, so their scores aren't so low. And just keep it simple. The appraisers get to watch this once. If they don't get it, if they miss something, if they are confused, they score what they see. And so you get one shot at this, and that's that. I know my team one year thought we were being really clever and did a storyline of male and female perspectives on the same situation, and we thought we were really clever. Nobody understood what was happening, and our scores reflected that. So, you can have the best intentions, but remember, if it requires an explanation to know what's going on, or is overly complex so that if you watch it once, you don't understand it, you're going to have lower scores. After the presentation, another thing to make sure that your kids are prepared for are that the appraisers are going to come and talk to them about their presentation. So the appraisers are going to ask about the scored elements. Good rule of thumb is that not everybody is to make sure that the kid that did the thing is the one that talks about the thing. So if you've got a really cool tech item, and somebody asked the kid that made the costumes about it, don't be afraid to say, hey, John, can you come over here? Or hey, Mary, can you come over here and talk to the appraisers about this really cool thing you made? We want to give the kids as many points as possible. And the way that we're going to do that is by talking to the people that made it. And so just keep that in mind. We also have very limited time. So we would love to talk about everything, but we train the appraisers to just ask about the scored elements. So we try to stay focused. And so if your kids are prepared to just kind of walk through and talk about those scored elements, and be concise and be descriptive about what they did and how they made it, that's going to be just easier for everybody. Roughly 5 minutes is about all the time we have for this. And so we need to be concise and we need to be pretty efficient. This is also when interference comes out. And sometimes the team managers are as surprised as anybody else. Well, who made that? Who made that? Oh, my dad made that. Oh, okay. We're not fishing for that. We just want to understand what the kids did and how they made it. But if it does happen, we'll ask some clarifying questions to understand how much the team member did versus how much somebody else did. And we will address it with an interference deduction at that point. And team managers, again, you are absolutely welcome to observe and listen to this Q&A, but you should not be participating in the Q&A. So just keep that in mind. Some sample questions. We don't go down this list and ask everything, but these are the kind of things that appraisers might ask. So just a list of things for you to take a minute to take a look through and work with on your team. Scoring, I'm looking at time, so we're going to keep moving here. We kind of talked about this before, but it is our job as appraisers to award each team as many points as possible. So the philosophy of awarding points is to emphasize what the team did produce, not what they didn't produce. And so this isn't a situation, every team starts with a 0 and earns all their points up versus starting with a full score and then getting deductions for things that they didn't do. So it's just kind of the philosophy of how we award teams the points for the things that they do. There are 3 types of scores. There are objective scores, which is did it happen, did it not? Oftentimes this comes in technical engineering challenges, yes or no, it's a 0 or a 5 or a 0 or a 10. Did it happen, did it not? Most of your scores are going to be subjective. They're going to be based on the opinions of the appraisers and how well or how creatively we felt your team solved the challenge. We always have at least 2 people scoring everything, but keep in mind what one person thinks is creative, another person may not think of as creative. But the same people all day are going to be scoring all elements for the same challenge and level. So we make sure that it's consistent and fair across the board with those subjective scores. And then we also have 0 scores. We only give a 0 if a required action does not take place during the time limit of the performance, if something is missing, or it doesn't meet the challenge requirements at all. And every single appraiser that is scoring that item has to be in agreement if a 0 score is given. If one person saw the 5-second dance and everybody else missed it, that dance happened and you're going to get at least 1 point for it. You may have a low score, but if it's a 0 and it really didn't happen, everybody has to be in agreement of that. Something to keep in mind is if something doesn't happen within the 8-minute time limit, we cannot score it. So if you had a team choice element that was a song or a dance or something that was performance-based, and you run out of time and they call time, when that time is up, nothing else can happen and nothing can be scored. So that would be an example of something that might receive a 0 score, is it didn't make it in during the 8-minute presentation. Unified subjective scoring. So every score that an appraiser gives is on a 1 to 30 scale. And then the scoring program scales that down to make it out of 20 or 10 or 5 or whatever it is. This makes it much easier for our appraisers because they only have to think on they don't have to say, okay, is this out of 10? Is this out of 20? No, everything we score is out of 30. And then the scoring program takes everything else into account. And we tell the appraisers it's really important to use the entire range when giving scores. If something is not well done, I train my appraisers that a 4 or a 5 is a valid score. But if something really impresses them, don't be afraid to give a 29 and to use that entire range. And so your scores, you know, some appraisers score low, some appraisers score high, but we want them to be not all high or all low, right? Because we want you to have a separation between the best teams and the teams that maybe need to do a little bit more work to be prepared. So these are some example scoring rubrics. Appraisers do not have to use these rubrics. We provide these rubrics as guidance for appraisers. We just ask that whatever rubric an appraiser uses, they consistently use all day. I'm going to be really honest. I've appraised probably thousands of teams at this point. Not an exaggeration after 20 some years of, almost 20 years of appraising. I don't use rubrics. I know what my 15 is here. And I stay consistent. I write down every score I give so that I make sure that I'm consistent all day. But this is just kind of a good guideline. So 1 to 8, the solution applies, attempted an application, solved with marginal addition. Keep in here 9 to 16, the solution is complete. DI scoring is not like grades in school. 50% means you solve the challenge. So keep that in mind. If you did the amount of effort and did a presentation that met all of your challenge requirements in DI, you're going to get 50% of the points. To get those 24 to 30 and those wow points, we want it to be innovative. We want the appraisers to go, wow. I can still tell you team solutions that I saw that made me go, wow, from 2004. Because those teams that I give these points to are that wow that almost 20 years later, I remember them. So know that a lot of times the appraisers save those wows for the really special stuff. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of talking to your kids. And I hope you share these with your kids so that they understand scoring. But this is what we train our appraisers with. This is another example for a more generic, minimal effort, 1 to 5, satisfactory, average, outstanding, just to kind of put some other terms around it. It is important that you kind of level set with your kids, because otherwise when you get your score sheets back, sometimes people freak out and think their scores are really bad, and they really aren't. It's just not like grades in school. A 50% in DI means you solved the challenge, it's not failing. And so it's important that teams understand that. This is an example of integration. So those of you who've been around a while know that these are my words. I actually wrote this rubric with DI. Part of the perks of being an international challenge master, we didn't have one, so we wrote one. I like to think about integration as how well does something fit into a presentation. If you have perfect integration, if an element wasn't there, how much would you miss it if it wasn't there? If integration is perfect and you got rid of that, you would be confused if it wasn't there. You know, that element is super important. It really matters. So the more it matters, the more integrated it is. And a good tip, if you're trying to gauge integration, is to do a presentation and get your phone out and record it without a specific costume or a specific element or something, and see how much you miss it if it isn't there. You know, the more you miss it, the more integrated it is. Keep in mind, this is also subjective, but I think this is a really important rubric to talk to your kids about as you have conversations about integration. Special awards. So scoring, just kind of last minute, we train appraisers that consistency is key, right? We give them rubrics, we train them on rubrics, but at the end of the day, creativity is a very subjective and individual thing. And that's why we make sure at least 2 people or more, if possible, are scoring every element and averaging it out. And so there are times where your kids or you may think something is really creative and the appraisers just don't like it. And unfortunately, you know, that's sometimes just the luck of the draw, right? And so, you know, it's important to think, is this going to be creative to a niche set of people? Is this creative to middle schoolers of now? What's a 50-year-old going to think about this? You know, to think about, is it appealing to a wide range of people? We try to have a balance of ages of appraisers, but at the end of the day, right, we use the volunteers that we have. And a lot of times they tend to skew older. And so some of the references that kids have today or use today, I mean, I'm going to date myself. I'm 38 and I don't watch kids shows, so I don't understand some of the references. You know, I'm reaching that point. So just keep that in mind as well, that creativity is subjective, and to make sure that you're thinking about things universally as much as possible, if you really, you know, and to appeal to a wide audience. Special awards. So we have the ability to give awards if teams go above and beyond. And those are in 4 categories. For everything but service learning, there's 3. So Spirit of DI Award, Superior Role Models, Teamwork, Sportsmanship, Volunteerism, that's given. The most common awards that are given for our team challenges are our Renaissance Award and our Da Vinci Award. Appraisers are asked after every tournament day if there were any teams that really stood out and went above and beyond to be given that award. I'm going to be really honest, when I talk to special awards for my team members and appraisers, I say, if you have to think really hard about whether or not somebody deserves a special award, they don't deserve a special award. This should be something that if you say, what was the coolest thing I saw today? Immediately that is popping out as something above and beyond and extraordinary. So we really do try to save these for those teams that really do hit that wow or are really doing creative and awesome things. So if your team gets a special award, you know, definitely know that they're not just given out lightly. We do take these as special and award them accordingly. And then the Torchbearer Award, because the Service Learning Challenge, the presentation that they put on, they're not scored on their actual projects that they're doing out in the community. They're scored on what they present about their projects on tournament day and the elements that they present. So the Torchbearer Award is limited to those to honor those solutions that have an impact in the community and really make a difference on the actual project itself. So that's a really cool award too that's available for our service learning teams. Few distinctions. Raw scores. Raw scores are the points awarded by the appraisers. They tell you how well the appraisers felt your team solved the challenge. They don't compare you to other teams. And they're calculated for central challenge, team choice elements, and instant challenge. And like, once again, that breakdown, 75% of it is your team challenge presentation, 25% of your score is going to be that instant challenge. Once teams have finished their presentations, the team with the highest raw score in each area is given the total possible points. And then all teams receive a scaled score and a percentage, so kind of like grading on a curve, based on how close to that top score they were. And we consider teams tied when their total scaled scores are different by 1 point or less. We scale scores differently depending on the challenge. And so in the technical challenge, all sections are scaled separately. In scientific, fine arts, improv, all sections are scaled together. And in engineering, there's very specific things that are scaled separately, and then all scores are scaled together, and then service learning, all sections are scaled together. We just say this because what your score sheets look like at the end of the day and how they're broken out is going to be different based on what challenge you are part of. Okay, I do have examples. I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget. So picking up your raw scores. So for team challenge, you have an opportunity to pick up raw scores after your presentation. So once your scores are ready, your challenge master or head appraiser is going to look at the scores. If there's anything zero or anything confusing, they may talk to the appraisers and make notes of any deductions to be ready for you to come and pick up your raw scores. Then they can be picked up and they'll tell you where, but you basically come to the site and say, hey, we're here for our scores. You have one manager and one team member can come and pick up the scores. We can't have the whole team. The rules of the road says one team member, so we go by the book, allow that. So what's going to happen is that team rep and the team manager are going to come. They're going to go through your scores. Typically, we don't have printouts anymore. This is all going to be on a computer or on an iPad or something, and walk through all of your raw scores, allow you to ask any questions you might have. And then at the time that you're done, they're going to email those scores to you, to the team manager on record. So you'll have a copy in your inbox or on your phone or wherever. And then you're going to have 30 minutes to review those scores. And if you have any issues, problems, or concerns, we ask that you come back within that 30-minute window. So this is an example of a raw score sheet that you might see. This is back to that daring devices category again. It's going to list, so this is going to look very similar to that scoring page in a challenge, right? It's going to list a column for your max score and then what your score was. Any deductions or issues that would have happened are going to be outlined. Those will be reviewed to you by your challenge master, and they're going to just kind of walk through your raw scores here. Deductions, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but we want to maintain a level playing field. We don't like to give deductions, but if something isn't right, if there is interference, if a legal procedure happened, if a team isn't behaving appropriately, vandalizes anything, ruins the floor in the gym because something scraped. I've had that happen unintentionally. Don't damage your sites. Leave them the way you came from. We may assess a deduction. And so just those typically come off of as a percentage of an individual element in your challenge. Unless it's an unsportsmanlike deduction and an other deduction, then that's taken from your overall team score. Instant challenge, you're going to walk through that prep checklist and that process ahead of time and pre-prep. We ask that you're going to have a scheduled time for instant challenge just like you do, and that you come 15 minutes prior to your scheduled instant challenge time. After you check in, you're going to be asked to wait in a holding area until the appraisers are ready for the team. And then somebody's going to come and get your team and walk you through to the instant challenge room. Appraisers, just a few things to keep in mind. Appraisers are watching for teamwork the minute you walk in the door. Your first impression is going to make a big difference. A little bit different for instant challenge than team challenge is that there are specific rubrics for instant challenge. Every element, the appraisers are going to have a very specific rubric for how they should score. And I'm not going to talk about this, but in the roadmap and in the training I did last week, team roles, I really encourage you to read about those and talk about that. I think that can really help your team as you're going through the instant challenge process. This is an example rubric that is used for teamwork. So definitely take a look at this. You know, your 24 to 30 teamwork, team dynamics are exemplary, team roles are easily identified. That goes back to, right, those team role samples that I talked about that are in the roadmap as something that you should definitely take a look at. That can help, just everybody knows their place, everybody knows what they're supposed to do, they're working together. If you've got dominating individuals, that's when you're going to be in your lower teamwork scores. Same thing here, an example, creative use of materials rubric. We're going to send all of these out. You can kind of go through these and just get a feel for how well are you using your materials? Because if you've got a task-based challenge, you're going to have stuff to play with. And the appraisers are going to be using rubrics similar to this to determine how to score your team. You will not receive raw scores for instant challenge until after the award ceremony. And at that point, you're only going to get a total score. You're not going to get a breakdown like you do for your team challenge of your instant challenge scores. You may receive a deduction if anybody's found to have interfered with the challenge. That's really rare. Team managers, you can go in the room, but sit on your hands, don't say anything, just observe. You don't want to cause your team a deduction. And we take it very seriously. If you're caught sharing instant challenge prior to global finals, you could be disqualified. You know, we want to keep it a level playing field. It's not an instant challenge if it's not a surprise for other teams. So we just ask that you do work through that. If something funky happens during your instant challenge that you're concerned about, you know, you should ask any of those questions, just like there's a challenge master for each of your team challenges. You may never meet this person, but there is a challenge master for instant challenge. So if something does happen that's procedurally weird or something goes awry in instant challenge, you certainly could ask to speak to the instant challenge master about that. It's really rare that that happens, but just know that there is an overall challenge master that you can speak with, or your regional director or the tournament director if something happened as well. Some scoring tips: know where your points are in instant challenge. This comes with just practice to know what you're being scored on. Every instant challenge is very different. And so just because you've read one task-based instant challenge doesn't mean that all task-based instant challenges are going to score the same way. Also, know how much time you have left. You can always ask how much time is available and remaining in your instant challenge. And so properly managing that time in an instant challenge is really important. And then remember that teamwork. Teamwork is a consistent scoring point in every instant challenge. You are always going to be scored on how well your team works together. So definitely take time to focus on that. So this is just a really simple example. I pulled this from the roadmap of knowing your points. So you can see here for scoring, your team is going to earn 2 points for each full inch of the height of your structure, up to 40 points total. So what does that mean? It means that if your tower or whatever you're building is more than 20 inches of height, you've maximized all the points you can possibly get for this challenge. So you're not going to get any more points if you make it any taller. And so look for things like that, right? There's often caps on the amount of points that you can get for certain things. And so, you know, if you want to get it to the height, if you've maxed your points, it is not to your advantage to keep building it taller. You're not going to get any more points. And in fact, you might accidentally knock it over and get no points. And so, you know, just things like that, that you want to pay specific attention to for what you're actively being scored on. And not forgetting that, you know, it has to also be, you know, the height of your structure. And in this one, spanning the distance between pieces of paper, that you need to do that. And that's 20 points. So that's objective, right? If you do it, you get 20 points. If you don't do it, you get 0 points. So that's a really easy 20 points. So just, you know, pay attention to your scoring. and make sure that you're getting all of the quote easy points right on. And then, you know, to maximize and not leave easy stuff on the table. Final score sheet, and I know I'm getting close on time, but I wanted to show an example. So this is what we mean when things are the top team in every area gets the most amount of points. You can see here, we've got 10 teams. This elementary daring escape from our state tournament last year. But you can see the team that placed 6th, they got first place in instant challenge, but they didn't do as well with some of their other scores, right? And the team that placed at the top team choice elements placed 8th. But you can see here, right, the technical elements, those hazards and devices and stories, that was, you know, most of the points in their challenge. So this team A that got 2 of the 3 of those, they placed first. And so you can kind of see how each of those areas after they're scaled, and depending on how close another team was to the maximum points, all that can, you know, really change the placement on the final scaled scores. And this is an example when we say scaled scores. So the bottom line down here is the raw score that you got back on the sheet that you received for how well the appraisers solved your challenge. And then the top score and the top line is what we say scaled scores. And you can see an example here. Any team that is within 1 point of each other is going to be tied. It doesn't have to be the exact number, but that you see that 8th place and 9th place had ties because they were within 1 point of each other. Appeals, really quickly. It is your job as a team manager to be an advocate for your team. If something is not right about the scores, if a deduction happened that you don't agree with, if something doesn't feel right, please make sure you come back within that 30-minute window and talk to your challenge master. We are here to work with you and resolve things. And we want you to use the appeals process if you need to, and use the dialogue process if you need to. We will do everything that we can as challenge masters and head appraisers to work with you to resolve things at that level first. If it becomes clear that there is a disagreement between the team and the challenge master and it is not going to be resolved, you can request something called a dialogue. And that dialogue team is comprised of the tournament director, a challenge master, and some other knowledgeable person at the DI tournament. They are independent, they will review things, and their decision is final. So you could be worse off after a dialogue because they could determine that a deduction wasn't enough. They could reduce the number, the points of a deduction, or they could uphold it and say, nope, that's fair, and leave it as is. So you never really know what that dialogue team is, but if you do feel like you can't resolve it, that process is there. And there's a lot of more details in the rules of the road that I encourage you to go through and read. But please don't be afraid to be an advocate for your team, but be nice to the appraisers, please. You will get so much further ahead if you do not yell at the appraisal team. As a challenge master, I refuse to engage with anybody that's yelling at me, because and please do not yell at officials and appraisers. Most people don't do that. Sometimes people get upset and, worked up on tournament day and they don't mean to, emotions are high, but try to, approach it calm, cool, collectively and have a conversation about it. You're going to get a lot further along in the process if you're nice and polite than if you come in yelling and accusatory. Usually we can work things out. Things that can be appealed: deductions, procedural irregularities that weren't the team's faults. Something happened that was weird, or an appraiser called something wrong or gave wrong information. We're human. We try to make sure it doesn't happen, but things happen. And, we address those. Or an objective or zero score. If the appraiser said that something didn't happen and you just gave your team a 0 and you disagree with that, that is something that could be appealed. Subjective scores cannot be appealed. So you might not like your scores if they're subjective, but they're subjective. And so you cannot appeal that. We also do not allow recordings or photographs as part of the appeal process. So it is a conversation of what happened. We cannot review video. We cannot record pictures. You also are not allowed to come and complain about another team. This process is only about your own team and what happened with your team. You can't bring another team into the process. So just keep that in mind. We hope you don't need this process, but if you do, please don't be afraid to use it. We've got it for a reason. Okay, I'm not 5 over, sorry about that, but I went fast at the end there, but we'll pause and see if anybody has any questions quickly. And then if not, we will stop the recording. Any questions that folks have immediately? I know for a lot of you, this is information you're not thinking about now. It's not tournament time. You've got, your teams are just starting your solutions, but I hope that it's helpful for you to hear this now versus in January, right? Because I think if you're thinking about how things are being scored and what you might need to be prepared for as far as tournament data forms or the tournament experience, now is the time you can be working that into your team meetings and practicing with it and having some time to actually talk about it versus just, getting this as a just before tournament kind of a thing where it might be too late. So if you do have questions as you get nearer the tournament, we're going to send this deck out so that you have it for reference. This recording is going to be on the Wisconsin DI website. So if you want to go back and reference anything, you certainly can do that or share certain sections with your kids. Totally fine. This is my email address. Feel free to email me if you've got any questions. I'm not going to be able to answer anything that's challenge specific for your challenges, but if it's more generic, general stuff, I'm happy to help and answer that as I can. All right, we got a question here. All right. All right. No, that was just thank you. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all. Good luck with your teams. We are here to help. Do not be afraid to reach out if you are feeling overwhelmed or confused. There are lots of great resources available to you. Please use them. We appreciate you. We thank you, and we wish you good luck with your kids and your teams.